Vera Langford stood at the bar during her wedding reception, adjusting her veil while studying her reflection in a polished copper backsplash. She had restored that copper herself over 3 long months, sanding, sealing, and polishing it until the surface shone like glass. That mirror finish was the only reason she noticed what happened next. Behind her, reflected perfectly in the metal, stood her mother-in-law, Dorothy Langford. Dorothy did not look at Vera. She looked only at the champagne flute resting on the bar. Vera watched her open a small clutch, remove a slim glass vial, and tilt it carefully. 3 clear drops fell into the champagne. Dorothy's movements were precise, practiced, and completely calm. Vera did not turn around. She did not gasp or stiffen. She waited until Dorothy stepped away to greet a woman Vera vaguely recognized as a senator's wife. Only then did Vera move. With steady hands, she reached out and quietly switched the glasses on the bar. The poisoned champagne was no longer hers. It now belonged to Dorothy. Before I continue, I need to ask you for a favor. We're working toward our first 1,000 subscribers, and your support truly makes a difference. If you haven't already, please take a moment to subscribe to the channel, like this video, and comment where you're watching from. That single click helps keep this channel growing and allows me to keep bringing you stories like this. Vera left the bar without touching either drink, her pulse steady, her face composed. Most brides would have locked themselves in the restroom after witnessing something like that. Vera did not. She was a restoration architect by trade. Her career revolved around failing structures, hidden damage, and collapse that came without warning. Panic was never useful in her work, and it was useless now. What she felt instead was pressure, silent, immense, and familiar. Engineers called it static load, the weight a structure carries just before it either holds or breaks. Vera walked back to the head table, her heels clicking evenly against the hardwood floor. She checked her breathing. Controlled. Her pulse hovered slightly above normal but steady. She smoothed the silk of her dress and sat beside her husband, Daniel Langford. Daniel was a pediatric surgeon, a man who saved children's lives daily but had somehow never learned to recognize disease in his own family. He squeezed her hand beneath the table and smiled at her with pure affection. "You look incredible," he whispered. Vera smiled back. 10 feet away, Dorothy now held the champagne flute, the same one she had tampered with, completely unaware that the balance of power had shifted. Dorothy sat across from them, laughing easily with Vera's parents as if nothing were wrong. Her posture was perfect, her silver gown immaculate, her smile practiced. When her eyes met Vera's, the warmth vanished instantly. There was no confusion there, no doubt, only certainty. Dorothy raised her champagne glass slightly in a private toast, her lips curling in a restrained smirk that said she believed the game was already over. Vera did not respond in kind. She reached instead for her water glass. Her hand did not shake. She took a slow sip, letting the cold, clean taste ground her. Dorothy, still confident, took a long drink of the champagne. Vera watched carefully. Dorothy had spent 2 years trying to erase her, offering money, withholding invitations, planting quiet insults meant to weaken rather than wound. She had underestimated one thing. Vera knew how to read stress fractures. She knew exactly how long something could hold before it failed. Vera set her water glass down and waited. To understand why Vera did not stop Dorothy earlier, someone would need to understand the history between them. This was not a sudden act of madness. It was the final stage of a long campaign. From the moment Daniel introduced Vera to his family, Dorothy had treated her like a temporary inconvenience. The Langfords were old money, the kind that mistook inheritance for superiority. Vera built things. Dorothy owned them. Their conflict had begun quietly at an estate inspection, where Vera arrived in work boots and a dust-marked jacket. Dorothy had looked at her hands and asked Daniel if he was employing her for renovations. When told Vera was his girlfriend, Dorothy simply said, "Oh," and turned away. The slights never came loudly. They came in omissions, mislabeling, and polite disregard. Dinners Vera was not invited to. Introductions that erased her qualifications. But 6 months earlier, Dorothy had crossed a line. She slid a cream-colored envelope across her desk and called it a severance package. Inside was a check for $100,000. Vera slid it back untouched. "I'm not for sale," she said calmly. That was when Dorothy stopped pretending. In behavioral psychology, there was a term Vera had learned while studying material stress responses: extinction burst. When a pattern of control stops working, the behavior intensifies before it collapses. That was Dorothy in the weeks leading up to the wedding. She called vendors and tried to cancel services under false pretenses. She damaged Vera's veil and blamed the fabric. Every act was designed to destabilize without leaving fingerprints. Vera documented everything and told no one. She understood that Dorothy's greatest weapon was plausibility. No one believed behavior that extreme until it was undeniable. That was why the vial at the bar had not surprised her. It had confirmed what she already knew. Dorothy was not trying to stop the wedding anymore. She was trying to destroy the memory of it. The humiliation. The narrative. The control. Vera had simply allowed Dorothy to finish what she started, only not in the way she expected. As applause rose in the room and Daniel prepared to give his speech, Vera folded her hands in her lap and listened closely. Structures always made noise before they collapsed. You just had to know when to stay still and when to let gravity do the rest. Daniel stood to give his speech, and the room leaned toward him instinctively. He had that effect on people. Calm voice. Honest smile. The kind of presence that made parents relax and children trust him without question. He spoke about partnership, about choosing each other daily, about building a life that could withstand strain. Vera listened carefully, struck by the irony without flinching. Across the table, Dorothy lifted her champagne again, taking another measured sip. She looked pleased with herself, relaxed now, as if the danger had passed. Vera counted silently. She had not studied chemistry in depth, but she understood cause and effect. She understood dosage and intent. When Daniel finished, applause rippled through the hall. He leaned down, kissed Vera's cheek, and whispered that he had never been happier. Vera squeezed his hand once, grounding him, then released it. She did not look at Dorothy. She listened instead, to the room, to the tempo of voices, to the subtle shift that comes before disorder. Dorothy's collapse did not arrive dramatically. It arrived awkwardly. Mid-sentence, she stopped speaking to Vera's father. Her smile faltered. Her eyes blinked too quickly, unfocused. She touched her throat, then the table, as if the furniture had suddenly moved. Chairs scraped. Someone laughed uncertainly, assuming it was a joke or a misstep. Then Dorothy tried to stand and failed. Her knees buckled, and she grabbed the tablecloth, dragging flowers, glassware, and a linen runner down with her. The sound cut through the room like a dropped plate. Dorothy gagged violently. There was no dignity left in it. She vomited onto the floor, onto herself, onto the careful image she had curated for decades. The string quartet stopped playing. Someone screamed. Daniel was on his feet instantly. "Mom," he said sharply, kneeling beside her. Vera stayed seated for one more breath, watching the moment settle into truth. Chaos followed, but Vera moved cleanly through it. She stood and raised her voice just enough to be heard. "Music off," she told the DJ. "Clear the aisle. Call emergency services." The wedding coordinator obeyed without question. Daniel's medical training had already taken over. He checked Dorothy's pulse, her breathing, her pupils. "She didn't faint," he said to no one in particular. "This isn't a stroke." Dorothy groaned, words slurring into nonsense. Her clutch slid from her lap and hit the floor, snapping open. Lipstick rolled. A compact clattered. And then Vera saw it, the small glass vial, empty now, catching the light. Daniel saw it too. His hands froze. For the first time that night, his certainty cracked. The paramedics arrived quickly, professional and alert. As they lifted Dorothy onto the stretcher, Vera stepped forward and quietly picked up a folded piece of cream-colored stationery lying beside the vial. Vera recognized the paper immediately. Heavy stock. Dorothy's handwriting. She did not open it alone. She walked straight to Daniel and held it out. "Read this," she said evenly. Daniel hesitated, then unfolded the page. His eyes moved quickly across the lines. The color drained from his face. It was a prepared statement, an apology written in advance, blaming Vera for a supposed relapse, suggesting emotional instability and alcohol abuse. It was meant to be read aloud, to control the story while Vera was helpless. Daniel folded the paper carefully. Something in him shifted. Not loudly. Not emotionally. It was quieter than that. Final. He turned to the paramedic. "She ingested an emetic and a sedative," he said flatly. "There should be a vial in her belongings." Then he looked at Vera, really looked at her, and for the first time saw the full structure of what had almost happened. At the hospital, the air smelled like antiseptic and inevitability. Dorothy was stabilized quickly. The drugs had done their work and burned out, but the damage was already permanent. A police officer waited in the corridor, notebook in hand. Vera did not embellish when she gave her statement. She didn't need to. She showed the officer the security footage the venue manager had already sent. Clear, time-stamped, undeniable. Dorothy removing the vial. Dorothy dosing the drink. Intent captured in high definition. Daniel stepped out of the room where his mother lay and walked directly to the officer. She confessed to motive, he said calmly. And this proves premeditation. He handed over the folded letter. His father tried to speak. Daniel didn't let him. This ends tonight, he said. When he signed the report requesting charges and a restraining order, Vera felt something solid lock into place between them. Not romance. Not adrenaline. Something stronger. Trust under pressure. Dorothy regained consciousness just before dawn. Her voice was hoarse, her movements sluggish, but her mind was sharp enough to calculate. She asked for Daniel first. When he entered the room, she reached for his hand with trembling fingers, playing the role she had perfected for decades. I did it for you, she whispered. She's wrong for you. She was going to ruin everything. Daniel did not sit. He did not touch her. He listened until she finished, then said nothing. Silence unsettled her more than anger ever had. When the officer entered and asked if she wished to amend her statement, Dorothy's composure cracked. She tried to reframe it as concern, as fear, as maternal instinct taken too far. The words landed poorly. The letter Vera had found made that impossible. Intent could not be undone by affection. The officer thanked her and left. Dorothy stared at Daniel, waiting for rescue. It did not come. Harold Langford arrived later that morning, grey-faced and shaking. He asked Daniel quietly if there was a way to make it all disappear. A lawyer. A donation. An apology. Daniel shook his head once. If you interfere, he said evenly, you become part of it. The words were not cruel. They were surgical. Harold sat down heavily, understanding at last the cost of silence. Dorothy was charged before noon. Aggravated assault. Reckless endangerment. The judge approved a temporary restraining order without hesitation. Vera stood beside Daniel through it all, not speaking unless asked, not leaning unless necessary. She did not feel victorious. She felt resolved. The structure had failed exactly where it was weakest. The wedding never resumed. Guests left quietly, carrying the story with them whether they meant to or not. By evening, versions of it were already circulating, some distorted, some accurate, but the facts held. Video had a way of doing that. In the weeks that followed, Dorothy's defense tried to argue diminished capacity. Stress. Alcohol. Maternal panic. The letter destroyed every angle. You could not claim impulse when you had written a script in advance. Dorothy accepted a plea deal 2 months later. 24 months. No contact. No appeals. Daniel attended the sentencing alone. Vera stayed home and worked. When Daniel returned, he did not speak for a long time. Then he said, I didn't know. Vera nodded. I know. That was enough. They did not move into the Langford estate. They sold their wedding gifts and bought a neglected house across the city, crooked floors, cracked plaster, strong bones. Vera loved it immediately. She spent evenings repairing small things with patient hands, teaching Daniel how to see problems before they spread. He learned quickly. Some nights they talked about Dorothy. Some nights they didn't. There was no guilt between them, only clarity. Daniel cut contact completely. When Harold tried to reconcile, Daniel set firm boundaries and held them. Vera watched him do it with steady resolve. It was the most intimate thing she had ever witnessed. One afternoon, Vera dropped a ceramic bowl while unloading groceries. It split cleanly in two. She didn't throw it away. She repaired it using kintsugi, sealing the fracture with lacquer mixed with powdered gold. When it dried, the crack glowed brighter than the original surface. Daniel watched her work in silence. It's stronger now, he said. Vera nodded. That night, as the sun cut through the kitchen window and caught the gold seam, she understood something clearly. They had not survived by avoiding damage. They had survived by facing it without denial. The break had not weakened them. It had revealed exactly what they were made of. The trial moved faster than Vera expected. Facts had a way of compressing time. The security footage played once in court, then again in slow motion. There was Dorothy, calm and deliberate, scanning the room before removing the vial. No tremor. No hesitation. The prosecution did not raise its voice. It didn't need to. Dorothy sat rigid beside her attorney, lips pressed thin, her posture still elegant even as the story of her intent unfolded piece by piece. Vera attended every session. She did not avoid Dorothy's gaze, nor did she seek it. Daniel sat beside her, hands folded, his expression unreadable. When the defense suggested that Vera had misunderstood Dorothy's actions, Daniel leaned forward for the first time. He testified with precision, explaining dosage, reaction time, and symptoms consistent with an emetic combined with a sedative. He spoke as a doctor, not a son. The courtroom listened. Dorothy's image fractured quietly. Not shattered. Fractured. Enough to let the truth show through. When the judge accepted the plea agreement, there was no outburst. Dorothy nodded once, as if acknowledging a bad investment. As she was led away, she looked at Daniel, waiting for grief, for regret, for rescue. Daniel did not look back. Vera felt something close behind her ribs finally loosen. The process had not been dramatic. It had been thorough. And that, she realized, was exactly how accountability should feel. After the sentencing, life did not snap back into place. It eased forward cautiously, like weight being reapplied to a repaired beam. Daniel returned to work first. Pediatric surgery left little room for rumination, and the children reminded him daily why he chose precision over denial. Vera followed her own rhythm. She took on fewer projects at first, choosing jobs that required patience rather than speed. Some nights they talked about the wedding. Other nights they talked about nothing at all. The house slowly responded to their care. Floors leveled. Walls strengthened. Systems replaced before they failed. Friends visited and commented on how calm the space felt. Vera never corrected them. Calm was earned, not declared. One evening, Daniel admitted something he had never said aloud. "I was trained to diagnose illness," he said quietly. "I just didn't think it could look like love." Vera reached for his hand. "Most people don't," she replied. That honesty settled between them, heavy but stable. They weren't rebuilding a fantasy. They were building something that could hold. The community moved on, as communities always do. Another wedding replaced theirs in conversation. Another scandal took its place. But occasionally, someone would ask Vera how she stayed so composed that night. She never answered directly. She talked instead about preparation, about knowing where exits were, about documenting before confronting. Daniel learned to do the same in his own way. He set boundaries with surgical clarity. No second chances framed as tradition. No apologies disguised as obligation. Harold tried once more to soften things with nostalgia. Daniel declined gently and firmly. The silence that followed was permanent. It did not feel cruel. It felt necessary. Vera watched Daniel become someone lighter, freer. Not because he had won, but because he had stopped carrying something that was never his to begin with. On their first anniversary, they didn't host a party. They spent the day working on the house together. Daniel repaired a window frame. Vera refinished a staircase railing. At dusk, they sat on the floor eating takeout, surrounded by tools and dust. Daniel laughed suddenly, surprised by himself. "This is better," he said. Vera smiled. It was. There was no performance here. No audience. Just alignment. Later, Vera placed the repaired bowl on a shelf in the kitchen. The gold seam caught the light again, subtle but unmistakable. Daniel touched it gently. "It didn't disappear," he said. "The break." Vera shook her head. "It doesn't have to." That was the lesson Dorothy never understood. Control was not strength. Denial was not protection. Real stability came from facing pressure honestly and reinforcing what mattered. Years later, Vera would think of that wedding reception not with anger, but with clarity. It marked the moment illusion gave way to truth. The night she learned that love without boundaries was fragile, and boundaries without guilt were powerful. She and Daniel built a life that reflected that understanding, quiet, resilient, deliberate. The house aged well. So did they. When cracks appeared, they addressed them early. When stress came, they met it together. The past did not define them, but it informed them. And that, Vera knew, was the difference between damage and design. Time did what it always did. It settled things into perspective. Dorothy's absence became unremarkable. No phone calls. No letters. No dramatic attempts at reconciliation. The restraining order held, and so did Daniel. Occasionally, Vera would catch herself expecting interference, a disruption, some delayed consequence. None came. Instead, their life filled the space Dorothy once occupied. Daniel advanced in his department, respected for his steadiness under pressure. Vera's work gained quiet recognition. Clients trusted her because she never promised perfection, only durability. They learned that peace was not passive. It was maintained. Chosen daily. One afternoon, Vera reviewed old photographs from the wedding while organizing digital files. She didn't linger. The images felt distant, like architectural drawings from a previous version of a structure that had since been reinforced. She deleted nothing, but she no longer felt tethered to them. Daniel noticed and said nothing. He understood now that healing didn't require commentary. It required room. When Dorothy was released early for good behavior, the notification arrived by mail. Vera read it once and placed it in a drawer. Daniel never asked to see it. They discussed boundaries that night, reaffirmed them, and moved on. Dorothy did not reach out. If she expected remorse to reopen doors, she miscalculated again. Accountability had consequences that outlasted intention. Vera realized then that the true ending of the conflict had not occurred in a courtroom or a hospital hallway. It had happened the moment Daniel chose clarity over loyalty to harm. Everything after was simply administration. They did not celebrate Dorothy's downfall. They did not speak her name often. She had become irrelevant to the structure of their life, and irrelevance was more final than anger. One evening, years later, Daniel asked Vera if she ever regretted not exposing Dorothy sooner. Vera considered the question carefully. No, she said. The timing mattered. People believe truth when it arrives intact. Daniel nodded. He understood that now. Their marriage had never been tested by suspicion since. Trust had been forged under pressure and had cooled without cracks. They disagreed sometimes. They argued occasionally. But never about allegiance. Never about safety. Those foundations were set. Vera taught a junior architect once who asked her what made a structure last. Vera didn't talk about materials. She talked about honesty. About addressing stress instead of disguising it. About knowing when reinforcement was enough and when something had to be removed entirely. The student wrote it down like a revelation. Vera smiled. She hadn't learned it from textbooks. She had learned it at a wedding reception, standing in front of a copper backsplash she had restored with her own hands. On quiet mornings, Vera still noticed reflections. Windows, polished surfaces, water in a glass. Not with suspicion, but awareness. She understood now that clarity wasn't paranoia. It was preparedness. She and Daniel shared coffee at their kitchen table, sunlight warming the repaired floors beneath their feet. Their life wasn't flawless. It was stable. Intentional. Built to last. And that, Vera knew, was the truest form of restoration. Some families are built by blood. Others are built by choice, boundaries, and courage. Thank you for watching. If this story resonated with you, don't forget to subscribe, like, and share. Your support helps keep stories like this coming.